Okay, let's start with a book that has been described not as a story, but as a biblical apocalypse written in novel form, Blood Meridian. If you've ever read McCarthy before, you know he doesn't write happy little stories. He writes about death, violence, and the complete absence of hope. And Blood Meridian is widely considered his masterpiece. The story follows a teenager known only as the Kid, as he joins a gang of scalp hunters in the American Southwest in the 1840s. And if you think that sounds like some cool cowboy adventure, let me stop you right there. This isn't Red Dead Redemption. This is closer to Doom Eternal, but with less heavy metal and more human depravity. The gang is hired to collect Native American scalps for money, but instead of just doing their job, they basically massacre anything that breathes. Men, women, children, doesn't matter. The violence in this book is relentless, and McCarthy doesn't describe it in an action-packed way. He describes it with biblical weight. Like every act of violence is part of some larger cosmic horror. And at the center of it all is one of the most terrifying characters in literature, Judge Holden. The judge is, well, he's not really a man. He's described as this massive, hairless, pale figure who never sleeps, never seems to age, and is both insanely intelligent and insanely violent. He collects knowledge, sketches everything in a notebook, plays the fiddle, speaks multiple languages, and also casually slaughters anyone who crosses his path. He's like if Google search became a serial killer. Throughout the book, Judge Holden lectures about war. According to him, war is not just something humans do. It's the very essence of existence. He says things like, "War is God." That's the level of bleakness we're dealing with here. What makes Blood Meridian dark isn't just the gore, though there's plenty of that. It's the philosophical weight behind it. It's McCarthy basically saying, hey, you know all that stuff about human progress and morality? Yeah, that's all fake. Deep down, humanity is just an endless cycle of violence, and nothing you do matters because war itself is eternal. Now, a lot of critics have called Blood Meridian unfilmable, and they're right. The violence is so overwhelming, so constant, that putting it on screen would basically just be a 3-hour snuff film. Even Hollywood, which has made movies about everything from cannibals to killer clowns, looks at Blood Meridian and says, nah, too much. Why is it considered one of the greatest American novels ever written? Because it's brutally honest. It doesn't give you a clean narrative of good versus evil. It doesn't let you root for the hero, because there is no hero. It just holds up a mirror and says, this is what humanity looks like when you strip away the polite masks. And that's why Blood Meridian belongs on this list. It's not just dark, it's cosmic darkness. A book that makes you feel like the violence of history is part of something bigger and way more terrifying than you ever wanted to admit. Blindness by José Saramago. Published in 1995 by Portuguese Nobel laureate José Saramago, Blindness isn't just a novel. It's a philosophical gut punch wrapped in a dystopian nightmare, sprinkled with the subtle flavor of existential despair. Think of it as if Albert Camus wrote Contagion, but instead of a virus killing people, everyone just suddenly goes blind. And instead of governments fixing things, they just do what governments do best. Panic, screw up, and then completely collapse. The book begins innocently enough. A man suddenly goes blind while sitting in traffic. Not a slow fade into darkness, but a sudden, terrifying, white-out blindness. He goes to the eye doctor, but the doctor himself goes blind soon after. Then the doctor's patients go blind. And soon, it spreads like wildfire, an inexplicable epidemic of blindness sweeping through society. But here's the kicker. There's no explanation. No virus under a microscope, no mad scientist, no alien curse. Just blindness. The government tries to quarantine the newly blind in an old mental asylum, which sounds fine until you realize it's basically locking people in a prison without food, sanitation, or any way to function. Inside, people form gangs, violence erupts, women are exploited, and morality collapses faster than your New Year's resolutions. Humanity devolves into a primal survival mode where cruelty becomes the default. And outside the asylum, society isn't doing much better. Without sight, infrastructure falls apart, food distribution fails, and eventually the world turns into a rotting wasteland of blind survivors stumbling around like Sims characters without a player. Saramago does something weird and powerful here. He never names his characters, and they're just the doctor, the doctor's wife, the man with the black eye patch, and so on. At first, it's disorienting. Then you realize that this anonymity is the point. Stripped of sight, stripped of identity, stripped of social structure, people are reduced to pure survival instincts. The one exception is the doctor's wife, who mysteriously doesn't go blind. She pretends she did so she can stay with her husband, and she becomes the group's moral compass, their leader, and their caretaker. Through her eyes, we see the horror in unfiltered detail, the filth, the violence, the despair. She carries the weight of being the only one who can see, and that burden is arguably worse than blindness itself. Blindness is one of those books that haunts you long after you finish it. It's a reminder of how fragile everything is, and how quickly people can turn from civilized neighbors to desperate animals. And spoiler, nobody comes out of it looking good. Except maybe the dog. There's a dog who helps the main group, and honestly, he's the most human character in the whole story. Tender is the Flesh by Agustina Basterica. If blindness makes you lose faith in society, Tender is the Flesh makes you lose faith in humanity's ability to ever eat dinner like a normal person again. Published in 2017 by Argentine author Agustina Basterica. This novel answers a question nobody asked, but now you can't stop thinking about. What if factory farming still existed, but instead of animals, it was people? Yes, this book is exactly as horrific as it sounds. The premise: the world is in crisis. A virus has supposedly made all animal meat poisonous to humans. In response, governments and corporations invent a new system. They start breeding and processing humans as livestock. By renaming them, society strips them of humanity and makes it socially acceptable to slaughter and consume them. But don't relax yet. Basterica doesn't just hint at the metaphor, she makes you live inside it, smell it, taste it, gag on it. We follow Marcos, a man working in the meat processing industry. His job is to oversee the slaughter of these heads. He's emotionally detached, broken by grief after losing his child and watching his marriage collapse. Marcos hates his work, but he's trapped in it. One day he's given a gift, a live head, a female, to use however he wants. And this is where the novel stops being just disturbing and crosses into absolutely devastating. Marcos struggles between seeing her as human and treating her like livestock. The relationship that develops is both tender and horrifying, and without spoiling the ending, let's just say Basterica saves one final gut punch for the last few pages. If you've ever seen a documentary about slaughterhouses, imagine that, but with humans. The realization that this is exactly how society already treats animals. Basterica just swaps species to hold a mirror to our faces. By changing the word human to head, society sanitizes horror into something marketable. And if that doesn't sound familiar to you, think of terms like collateral damage or enhanced interrogation. Words matter. American Psycho by Bret Easton Ellis. Published in 1991, American Psycho is one of the most infamous, controversial, and darkly satirical novels of the late 20th century. Written by Bret Easton Ellis, the book was immediately met with outrage, bans, and a lot of angry critics who accused it of being misogynistic torture porn. And to be fair, those critics weren't entirely wrong. But here's the thing. If you look past the gore and brutality, the novel is actually a razor-sharp critique of consumerism, capitalism, and the emptiness of material wealth. It's basically what you get if Kafka, Marx, and Quentin Tarantino decided to co-write The Wolf of Wall Street and then slipped in a snuff film just to keep things spicy. Our main character is Patrick Bateman, a wealthy Manhattan investment banker who's good-looking, successful, and absolutely dead inside. He's the kind of guy who can tell you the subtle differences between a dozen designer suits but has zero emotional depth beyond greed, lust, and narcissism. On the surface, Bateman is the perfect 80s yuppie. But beneath that shallow exterior is a psychopath. Literally. He's a serial killer who tortures and murders people in graphic, gruesome detail. His victims are often women, homeless people, or anyone who represents society's disposable underclass. The way Ellis writes American Psycho is part of what makes it so disturbing. The novel is packed with meticulous detail about brands, fashion, restaurants, and consumer goods. Entire pages are spent describing Bateman's morning skincare routine or the subtle design differences in business cards. At first, it feels boring, even parody-level boring, but that's intentional. Ellis drowns you in this shallow materialism until you're numb. And then, out of nowhere, Bateman will describe an act of sadistic violence in the same flat, detail-obsessed tone. The contrast is what makes it terrifying. At its core, American Psycho isn't just a horror novel. It's a social satire. Bateman isn't a unique monster. He's a product of his environment. A culture obsessed with status, wealth, and appearances created him. Metro 2033 by Dmitry Glukovsky. Published in 2002 by Russian author Dmitry Glukovsky. Metro 2033 started as an online serial before exploding into a cult classic novel and eventually spawning a massive video game franchise. But at its heart, it's a story about survival, fear, and the way humanity clings to meaning in the face of annihilation. After a nuclear war devastates the surface, the remnants of humanity retreat underground into the Moscow metro system. Each station becomes its own little micro-society, with politics, trade, and alliances. Above ground, the surface is a nightmare wasteland filled with radiation, darkness, and mutated monsters. Humanity survives underground, but barely. Our protagonist, Artyom, is a young man tasked with delivering a crucial message that could determine the fate of what's left of civilization. His journey takes him through the Metro's many factions and dangers, and along the way he encounters both external threats, mutants, radiation, the mysterious Dark Ones, and internal ones, corruption, fanaticism, despair. Glukhovsky writes the Metro as this claustrophobic, oppressive environment. Imagine endless dark tunnels, flickering lights, dripping water, the ever-present risk of collapse, and the knowledge that one wrong step could mean death. We by Yevgeny Zamyatin. We is one of the earliest dystopian novels ever written, and it directly inspired later classics like Orwell's 1984 and Huxley's Brave New World. In fact, without We, dystopian literature as we know it might not exist. When it was first published, the Soviet government immediately banned it. Why? Because Zamyatin basically roasted authoritarianism so hard it made Stalin blush. The novel is set in the One State, a futuristic totalitarian society where every aspect of life is controlled. Citizens live in glass buildings so the government can watch them at all times. Privacy doesn't exist. Free will? Forget it. People don't even have names, they're identified by numbers. Our protagonist is D503. An engineer who's happily living his mathematically perfect life, building a giant spaceship called the Integral. At first, he believes in the One State's philosophy, that freedom is chaos, individuality is dangerous, and happiness comes from total conformity. But then, plot twist, he meets a woman named I-330, who's rebellious, mysterious, and not at all interested in math equations. Through her, D503 begins to question everything he's been taught. And that's where the darkness kicks in. We is a brutal critique of collectivism and authoritarianism. Zamyatin shows us a world where individuality is destroyed in the name of order. Alright, that's it for this video. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to like and share it with your friends.